Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Let's declare this Finance Audit and Risk Committee meeting open and call for apologies. We're all present and correct. Public participation. I have had 3 notices of requests for public participation. One from Vivian Bold. She notified us that she'd like to speak to the meeting, but we haven't heard anything. The other one was from Jeff Kane in terms of the discussion that we've had previously about requests for information made by way of public participation. This was actually just information that was required, and staff have actually responded to Mr. Kane already on that one. The last one was from Christine Moriarty in terms of the costs in keeping the landfill or the tip open. And it's basically nothing to do with the decision on the agenda. It's more about a future decision that needs to be made by council, and therefore I'm saying that that's not relevant to the items on the agenda that the committee are actually considering. So at that stage, in my opinion, there are no items for public participation. We will advise Christine Moriarty of that outcome, and I'm sure there will be a forum sometime in the future when she can actually raise those issues. I'm not aware of any late items. Declaration of conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest for decisions on the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair. One for me, item 7.5, page 63, there's a reference there to emergency management performance measures. I'll sit out from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Confirmation of our meeting held 29th of September. Can I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor David. Seconded, Councillor Todd. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. It's getting carried. Announcements. I'm not aware of any announcements. Our first report, substantial report on our healthy safety, 7.1, 7.5. Thank you, Panya and Ashley. Welcome. We'll take your substantial report as read, but is there any additional information you want to bring to the committee, or are there any real key highlights you want to bring to the committee?
I did not have any key highlights or any additional information that relate to this report. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any questions? I'm sure there's going to be 1 or 2 questions of clarification. Councillor Todd.
Hi. The one thing that I wanted to ask now, I think I did see somebody maybe with an email trail, but I haven't had a chance to read it. And this mightn't be for you guys, this might be to the C, or it might be for us, but with our COVID and the vaccinations, are we going to make a policy for staff and for councillors? And just would like a little bit of an update on that, if I could, please.
Through you, Chair, I will direct this question to Group Manager Mrs. Slade.
Through you, Chair. So the group is currently undertaking a risk profile for current roles that sit within council, and we're doing that across the MWLAS group. At the moment, because the COVID mandate doesn't cover us at this stage, our health order does not cover us, but as part of SOLGAM's look at across councils to try and guide us, we've had some information sent through from Simpson Grierson, and we are currently working through what that might look like. So at the moment we don't have a policy, but we are trying to work our way through what is available to us to put through anything, whether it's mandated and whether we have that ability to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, these are early days in terms of what is a very fast changing, I wouldn't say fluid, But, we get an announcement on Monday and it's going to be implemented by Friday and we've got to play catch up. So, Member Brian?
Chairman, we have heard anecdotally that threatening behaviour is an issue right through the country, and I noticed that in our graph on page 9 that there is a reduction, but is this something we're still quite worried about?
Threatening behaviour is something that does happen. If we don't get any reports, it doesn't mean we're not doing anything around that. We do have training events and seminars that support our staff to learn de-escalation techniques and personal safety. And we also ensure that in some of our public facilities we have the security team on hand. And so it is an issue we do take very seriously, and we try and ensure that our staff are confident in their workplace. If they do come across behaviour that's unacceptable, that they're able to deal with that.
It's really not a question, but it's more of a comment that I just appreciate the amount of work that goes into this, the information that you're providing to us as councillors, and it's pretty condensed, and it's I just appreciate all the work that you guys are doing, just to try and keep us informed of some of the things that are happening within the health and safety sector for our organisation. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you.
Are there any other comments? I've got a question on page 10 with the threatening behaviour that you've reported on the Animal Control Officer. So the question I have, the actions that council officers took, that was in line with council's policy, and were there any learnings from that incident?
Sorry. This is probably a situation where the officers do come across behaviour when someone's animals are involved, emotional attachment, or just poor behaviour. I think the learnings are probably around the backup of the procedures that they follow, and the training that they have received and continue to receive is working well. This event ended without any serious ramifications for anyone, and the dogs were able to be removed from the property. So I think what we are doing currently is very good practice, but that is always backed up with more training and discussion, debriefing with their manager. So I think that has worked quite well.
Thank you. Big report, short discussion. You have to remember that one. Can I have a mover for the recommendation on page 7, please? Thank you, Member Jackson, or Member Brian. Seconded, Councillor Todd. All those in favour, please say aye. Against carried. I have been training myself all day not to elevate Member Brian to Councillor Brian. Our next item is our customer and strategy activity update, page 21. Thank you, ladies. I actually had a brief discussion today or yesterday, I've lost track. It was today? On this in terms of the amount of work that is actually occurring in the space. So take the report as read. Is there any highlights or key information or new information you want to bring to the committee? Thank you.
No, we don't have anything further to add at this stage, but happy to answer questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got, I guess, a series of questions focusing on two areas, which is the additional income against forecast, and then also just around the delays in terms of the land use and the subdivision consents. So I might just start first, and I'm sorry, I have asked this question before, but I tried to rack my brain for the answer, which was around where there is a delay in terms of a building consent. I understand that there's some compensation that's payable to the applicant, whereas in the case of land use or subdivision consents, if there is a delay, there isn't sort of a compensation or a redress mechanism. Is my understanding of that correct?
No, it's actually the opposite way around. So with building consents, there isn't any level of discount applied, but for resource consents, there is a discount of 1% per day that the consent is over time, up to 50 working days in value.
So, given that, in terms of the focus of the report on, which I think so it sort of comments on, in terms of the land use consents, 1 and 3 not being processed in time, and 2 and 5 of the subdivision consents not being processed in time. Have we mapped out what the financial impact of that is in terms of what our, I guess, contingent liability is, or what the impact of that is on the income line?
We haven't actually mapped it out. It's not something that we plan for. It is something that is effectively resolved at the end of the process. So we're not aiming to be issuing consents over time. It's just the way the process is going currently due to the large volumes of work that's currently in progress. So it hasn't been mapped through. In saying that, the large volume of work is also somewhat offsetting any discounts that we're providing on that. Yes, we could provide some data in relation to that with further reports, but it's not something that it would be data from the previous months rather than something that we're predicting, because it's not the service that we're actually aiming to provide.
Sorry, Chair, I've just got a few sort of follow-up questions. So, based on that, I guess do we have insight or understanding of, I guess, the customer side of the equation in terms of the impact that the delays are having on our customers, and is there any plan to do, I guess, increase that understanding and insight? Because I imagine that there is some obviously commercial impacts potentially with those delays, but then there's obviously also, I guess, a reputational impact as well for council. And so I guess I'm keen to understand what insight do we already have, and is there any intention to perhaps do something like a survey or some sort of engagement with our customers to actually understand the impacts of the delay?
So just to explain the delays to some extent, we could be, so there are different mechanisms under the RMA where you can extend timeframes in relation to a consent, so that you don't have so many consents going over time. Now, we've had opportunities where we could have utilised that we haven't, because what we're trying to do is to, while we can't necessarily deliver the consent within the timeframes, we're trying to actually effectively not make that 100% the customer's problem, actually not manipulate the time frame so the consents are shown within time, and so the customer actually gets to some extent compensated for the extra time it's taken. So the exact same consents that we might have going out over time, you might have other councils where they are actually showing that they're within time frames. So yes, there is potentially an impact in terms of the customers, and no, we haven't surveyed it at this stage. That is something that we are planning on doing, some baseline service level, get some service level information in the future. However, I guess the thing is, at this point, this is unavoidable. We have engaged additional contractors to assist. Just earlier, I was looking at
the level of consents that we currently have in progress. So to provide some context, as of June last year, we were sitting for most of 2020 with around 60 consents in progress at any one time. For this financial year, we've had anywhere between 80 and 100 consents in progress at one time. So it's not just the numbers coming in that's gone up and the numbers going out that's gone up, it's the numbers that are in progress that are also up. So we've got additional contractors on board. We've also in the process of creating a new role to assist with that contractor management, because I'm sure you can appreciate more contractors actually creates more work for us in terms of making sure that the processes work properly. So yeah, it's unfortunately just where we're at with the level of activity that's in progress.
So, sorry, and then just final question on the delay aspect, which is, so in terms of this increase in workload, I think what I'm hearing is that, and I think this comes through in the report, is that you're suggesting this is, I guess, going to be sustained it appears to be a sustained increase rather than something that's being generated as a result of, for example, development contributions policy coming into force. So it's not just a peak and then it's going to revert back to where it is. Is it your, I guess, forecast this is going to be a sustained demand?
To be honest with you, I think it's actually too early to tell. I think the pre-development contributions rush of consents isn't just a 1 month blip. There'll be people that were going to their contractors months ahead of the DC decision that the consents just hadn't been applied for yet. So I think we're still potentially seeing the impacts of that interest earlier on in the year, and I think possibly in another 3 months or so we'll have a better indication of whether this is where we're going to be at for the rest of the year or whether it's just a blip for a few months.
And sorry, my final, just about the income income part of the report. So I think a couple of months ago, council adopted a new fee chart, and that was based on but I guess I just wanted to get some assurance that in terms of those fee charges, the excess amount is not because we haven't got the settings right in terms of those fee charges. And I think the report seems to suggest it's a timing
for the benefit of people who might be listening, you can ask the question that I raised earlier, which is there any risk to council's ongoing accreditation, and what with this turnover, so it impacts 25% of the staff who carry out a technical role, does that in turn place risk for us in terms of the staff? But also, what is the impact on our customers? Are they experiencing anything? That's the people who are buying, essentially buying that service. That risk is fairly low, so we are reporting monthly for the next 3 months to IANs in relation to our compliance with timeframes. In September we reported that we were over 97% compliant with timeframes, and they were quite happy with that because it makes the test for being sufficiently compliant, which generally the test is below 95%. A lot of other councils are struggling quite a lot at the moment, and so by comparison, 97% is actually a good result here. So I'm not too concerned about that. The other thing I guess that we need to remember is that we have actually replaced all of the staff there. The reason for the notification for the legislation is very specific around what we've got to the circumstances that trigger a notification. So because the staff weren't replaced within 20 working days of the previous people leaving, and because they didn't have exactly the same competencies, we had to do that notification. But everybody has been replaced, and we have one additional building officer as of yesterday. So we are also recruiting another additional officer. In terms of the impact on customers, I don't believe our level of service has dropped in terms of consent processing. Other than slight 3% is quite low. In terms of inspections, we've done the same amount of inspections as we would have in a quarter of last year, despite the lockdowns as well. And I guess the area that we are probably not performing as well as we would is around customer inquiry. So the general inquiries we're probably a bit slower than we would have been to respond to, and that's really because we're trying to prioritise the things that have the big impact on people, which is getting their consents and getting their inspections.
Supplementary. Thank you. I appreciate that. I know there's a lot of working pressure on the team. So I understand you say you don't believe there's any impact, but have we had any engagement with our customer base just to check in with them, given that there is a reasonably high turnover of staff and things change, expectations change? Has there been any sort of testing of that customer group to inquire, or is it just that there haven't been any complaints come through formally?
Yep, so it's basically we haven't done any proactive customer engagement. Once again, that's the reflection of the pressures that are on us at the time that we have available. Once again, like regulation is something that is on our to-do list, is proactive customer engagement. And once we've got our
ensuring that we are doing the right forecasting that we I guess putting the resources in the right place to avoid that, I guess, to mitigate and manage some of that risk around some of these things. Because there obviously is a financial risk here in the delay risk.
Yeah, I mean, the financial risk is actually useful to actually just go find it, understand what that actually is. And I hear the officer's comment that there is, because of that volume, that actually has impacted some of the risk of that risk. And just nicely do it right. We don't want to spend hours on it, but make it more like it, something
additional income compared than are other expenditure items? Not a reasonable question. The issue in terms of council's role in what we're doing is actually as well. We're saying, is council actually meeting its targets? If not, why not? And is there anything else we can do? Now, we can actually apply more resources, but the problem with mines is that there's I'm aware of one organisation that works in the building inspectors to a government department last year. So you can't just go and buy office rooms in the building applications, but if the government department is approaching the one that they ordered, it puts council in a very difficult position. So I think the issue is that you actually ask the right questions. Are we meeting our targets? What are the consequences? And is there anything else we can do? And sometimes you just might have to see and say it's a hard one. I don't know, right? That we might actually not meeting our targets. But have the question I have is have we that's the question. And we're actually in the usual time of being the other problem that I've seen is at the moment I think we're going through an upward cycle. It's only a cycle, we don't know how long that cycle is going to last for. If I could actually predict that I'll be a very good trend, the issue is at some stage there is actually going to be some downward pressure, and the risk that I perceive is that we actually gear up then the market slows for an unending reason, and interest rates could actually take that. I'm not convinced they will, but who knows? Then what happens if you've got excess resources? What do you do with those resources? And how much does it actually cost to the ratepayer having those resources sitting right there for a while? So it's a real tension between making sure we've got adequate resources and we can have the current higher than anticipated demand. Then you ask the question, how long is that demand going to last for? We don't know. Anyone's got some answers on that, really keen to hear that. Does that answer your question? I mean, I think this too, in terms of the trends, I was really interested. When I first read the report on the bottom of page 22, I saw a 5% decrease in inspections and scratched my head, and I read the next line below is that we're actually shut down for 2 weeks. We actually were shut down for 15% of the number of working days during the quarter, but we only did 5% less inspections. So that to me actually is telling something that the staff are actually working really hard to achieve that target. There's probably a number of reasons why they're taking it. That to me is the sort of information is quite information. What else happened in that quarter? No? Lockdown. You know? That was 14 days when everyone was working from home all of a sudden, overnight. Trying times, isn't it? Any other comments, questions? Therefore, if we go back to the resolution on page 21, can I have a mover for the recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Christine, seconded Councillor Joe. All those any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Our next item is our Horowhenua Alliance report. Welcome, David. Take your report as read. Are there any key highlights, further information that you want to bring to the committee's attention?
There's nothing additional I wish to add. I'm quite happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks, David. I just wanted to talk about the aspect of people and your operations manager who's retired after such a long time, 34 years, and just thinking how much knowledge he must have about the systems in the district and how they work. And that knowledge is lost. Is there some way that you've managed to capture some of that knowledge so that it isn't lost, so that it can be used?
We're quite fortunate in that we have a number of staff with relatively long lengths of service, not as long as what Bruce had, but they've been working with Bruce all of those years, all of the years they've been with us, and we've had quite an extensive transitional period from when Bruce tendered his retirement. I think he gave us 5 months' notice, so we've had a good transition into that period. We've been able to recruit from within our own team the new infrastructure delivery manager, which is Troy Bennett, who's worked under Bruce or alongside Bruce for a large number of years as well. So we've had a pretty good transition through there, and I mean, as far as we know, we've got things pretty much covered, and Bruce is still available. He's still local. He's still here in Levin, and he's quite willing to assist if there's any areas where we might find ourselves caught short.
Cool. Thank you.
David, are you feeling any more relaxed or comfortable about recruiting at the moment? I know you've had a real challenge, but
No, recruitment, I guess, is our biggest risk at the moment. We have 10 vacancies, as I've said in the report. We really need to fill 5 of those positions. There are a number of issues that are causing that. One is the government's immigration policy, so there are no more overseas expat engineers returning to the country. The water and waste industry itself, with the reforms, is having an impact on the desirability of working in the water industry because the future is unknown. People are wanting to stay where they are or look for something that there's a bit more security around. We've got an ageing workforce. And the other thing that's impacting, because there's such a skill shortage across the industry, even within the industry itself, as Chairperson Phillip remarked before, we're seeing crazy offers being made to people across the spectrum, being headhunted and offered ridiculous packages to transfer across to competitors. And that's happening right across the country at the moment. So where we're at, I guess.
Yes, thank you. On page 30, there's a comment around a new monthly task that's been added to check and clear the stormwater grate in the Western Part area to assist with drainage. So I just wanted to ask, is there something regularly that happens down Queen Street to the stormwater grate that enters Lake Horowhenua? Do you know?
That's an operational issue. I don't know. I would assume so, but I can't answer that question. Sorry.
Assuming we get back to the council on that, thank you. Councillor Sam?
Just a couple of questions. Dave, thanks for being here on this, I guess what we could describe as a dark day for democracy in terms of what the government has announced about Three Waters. But what actually intrigued me was your comment on page 30. If you okay, I'll just read it out, which is, all contracted response times to site were met for September. There have not been any urgent water call-outs for the year to date. So what I understand that to mean is essentially that since 1 July, we haven't had pipes bursting in the ground or pipes failing suddenly and then having to respond to that on an urgent or immediate basis. Is my understanding of that correct?
Yes, that is correct. We've had no major failures.
So, in terms of one of the things that the government has said in relation to Three Waters reforms is that signs of a system at breaking point are such when there are regular or permanent boil water notices, broken pipes, outdated sewage plants, environmental harm, and poor resilience. In terms of what you've observed there, does anything that you've seen certainly in recently suggest to you that in terms of Three Waters infrastructure that anything is broken in Horowhenua?
There are one or two areas around the treatment plants, I think, that need some attention, but I wouldn't say they were totally broken. But I mean, just as an indicator, you're saying some of those things that the government's quoted there, since the 1 July, maybe even slightly before that, the amount of CRM requests that we're getting coming through for leaks, maintenance, etc., have dropped right off. We're getting a very small number of those on a daily basis, like we might get 2 or 3 a day. A busy day we might get 10, but 5 of those will be final meter readings. So the system is not as broken as what that statement you read might portray it as being.
Thank you very much.
Hi. So the announcement. So it may not be much of our concern for very long, but the high risk you have around staffing. Is there any conversations happening, or that you're aware of happening in the background, how to address those shortages? And could one of those be some sort of apprenticeship or accelerated learning program where people or young people are in the water industry?
Downer already runs those programs and specialist recruitment programs for apprentices and different ethnic groups in society. So we've got quite a big team of those sort of recruits in our business now. So certainly something that as a business we've been working on for a number of years, and we're very proactive in that space.
I do recall, it's probably, I don't know, a couple of years ago, we had a presentation. He was a tall guy with anyway. So do you therefore engage with our local iwi, or because otherwise I haven't heard, in other words, it's not widely known, I think, maybe?
I'm aware that we have done that in the past. I'm not aware of us, well, certainly in my time, we haven't run a major recruitment process targeting that level in the workforce at this point in time. In terms of our field staff, our numbers are about right for the current workload that we have. So that's probably the best way I can answer that question at the moment. But certainly in other parts of the country, they're gearing up for quite extensive recruitment because we're bleeding resource.
Thank you. Any other questions of David? All right, thank you, David. Supported by Nikki. Thank you, Nikki. Can I have a mover for the recommendation on page 29? Thank you, Councillor Sam. Seconded. Thank you, Councillor Todd. All those, no further discussion. All those in favour, please. Sam, did you want to? Okay. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Next item is on page 33, Projects Steering Group Activity Report. And rather than ask for an officer to report, I wonder whether Councillor Christine want to make any comments regarding this. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is a group that meets monthly, and we basically receive information from officers about projects that are coming up, and we're able to, in a fairly informal situation, give free and frank exchange of ideas about what we think would work and maybe not. One thing that I would like to highlight from this that members of this committee would probably be interested in, because it does pose a risk, is that we discussed the live-in landfill capping project, and it became apparent that there is not the funds in the long-term plan budget needed to progress this. So it could possibly be a risk financially in the future.
Yeah, can I just comment on that live-in landfill aspect? Because in terms of the report, that was one thing that I was mindful of, is that councillors, as part of that steering group, received quite comprehensive information, financial information, and information about some what I would believe are quite significant decisions in terms of essentially council not having provided sufficient funds, it appears, in terms of the compliance side of things, in terms of our consent requirements, in terms of the capping. And so as a result, some funds that were earmarked for landfill development have been essentially reallocated to that capping project. And so that redevelopment, or that development project, which is included within the LTP as a specific project, essentially is now unfunded. And so that poses some pretty significant risk in terms of a decision that this council is likely to make in about 13 days around the landfill, because essentially if the council determines to keep the landfill open for whatever period of time, there is currently no budget, as I understand it, available to council to do that development.
Through you, Chair, if I could just respond to that. So whilst the funding that was available for landfill development has now been reallocated to the capping project, it doesn't mean that the Chief Executive can't come back to Council and seek additional out of annual plan or LTP budget for a program of works that needs to be done going forward, such as the building of a new landfill cell, if the council decides to continue with the operation of the landfill. So whilst it's identified that there is no budget available in the current LTP, I can come back and seek council support for additional funding to be available for a program of works, and in this case it would be the landfill cell.
I just had one final question in terms of that aspect of the report. As I understood it from the steering group meeting, that there were some further negotiations happening with the chosen contractor, and so I just wanted to understand where we have landed in terms of a total estimated cost for that project now, in terms of what's the total planned expenditure for that capping project.
So we don't have that answer at our fingertips at the moment, but we can provide that back to the councils after this meeting. It's in the $800,000 range, which I think was what was indicated at the project steering group, but we'll confirm that exact number later. Mr. Chief Executive, can I just clarify something here that was said by Councillor Sam, that there were decisions made? My understanding, there is no decision making within this group. It's only recommendations either to act within delegated authority or back up to council if necessary. Is that correct? The decisions were made under the Chief Executive delegated authority.
Yes, my apologies. So if I used the word decision making, I misspoke.
Yeah.
What I was relaying was that decisions have been made by officers, which were then councils were informed about.
No, I just wanted to clarify that, because since we are being recorded, I think it was actually quite important that we just clarify that point. Any further discussion on this? Therefore, can I have a recommendation for the mover on page 13? Thank you, Councillor David. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ross. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Next item is our financial report to 30th of September. Jacinta.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I think there's just one item that I wanted to, I'm sure there'll be a few questions around it, but just to note in regards to the report, and that is the Capex Program and the overall forecast for this current year. As you know, we've completed about 4 million for the year so far, and there does need to be some work, and we hope to bring it to you in the next meeting in terms of any potential changes in timing to the capital program. So I'm working across the business at the moment with the managers just to understand, given particularly some projects where managers may have assumed work might have been completed by the end of June 22, for example, and some of that now is anticipated to roll into the next financial year. That is likely to happen in a couple of cases, but the details of all of that we haven't quite worked through yet. But what we'd look to do for the next meeting is give you a summary of what that's currently looking like. So I just wanted to mention that as probably the most significant item for this report. In regards to that, in terms of the borrowing, where we may have assumed, for example, that we needed to borrow this month, we haven't done that, and we would look to reprogram the borrowings profile once we understand in more detail whether anything is going to shift or not. So just to flag that as the most significant item probably for discussion.
Thank you. Can I just ask Jacinta, please, to clarify what is exactly meant in the last sentence on page 37? This will help ensure that Council maximises its renewal and upgrade program.
So from what I meant by that in terms of writing it is that, for example, if a particular project was planned to be completed over year 1 and 2, and we had a split in terms of the total dollar value that might occur over those 2 years, if one project, for example, we thought might be completed quicker, and one was going to be slower, then we may come back to you and say, would it work to shift some of the money in year 2 to year 1 for that project, and vice versa because of the timing change. So that's where I was, what I was referring to when I mentioned that comment.
Thank you. I was just asking for clarification, really, in light of our previous presentation around assets and how they're not failing, and I was wondering whether the maximising its renewal program was indeed referring to maximising the life of our asset, which doesn't seem to be in such a terrible state.
That may very well be the case for some of the renewals in terms of the program that the Three Waters are working on with the Alliance, in terms of what we've budgeted and what might need to be the case this year.
Are there any other questions, comments on financials? Councillor Sam?
Yeah, thanks, Jacinta, and thanks for sort of proactively dealing with that point around the Capex, because those comments on page 37, and I think they're repeated on 40, did sort of concern me, given that we've just been through an LTP process, where was sort of my understanding and expectation that essentially that first 3 years of the LTP was quite carefully mapped out in terms of sequencing, prioritisation. So the only comment or question I had really was, in terms of the work that you're doing, will that be accompanied with, I guess, some explanation around why certain projects have been delayed or brought forward or reprioritised, I guess?
Absolutely. Wherever there's a project that might be planned to change, then we would be looking to give you absolutely some explanation as to why.
And then I had one just final question about, on that page 41, there's a reference there, roading work 560k compared to a budget of 2.4, and that relates to Gladstone Road. Later on in the report, I think there's a reference to emergency works and a budget of about 600,000 that had been allocated to emergency works for Gladstone Road. And I just wanted to establish whether the number there is different to the reference to the 600k in relation to the emergency works?
It was. There's an overall emergency works budget that isn't assigned to a particular project. It's just there for emergency works. In regards to the comment around that particular roading project, that was a separate budget. Yeah.
Yes, I just wondered, a bit of a similar to Councillor Jennings, but Gladstone Road has always seemed to me to be quite a risky project to actually estimate the costs, and it'd be quite nice to see an updated prediction of what that particular project's going to do and what sort of subsidies we'll get from NZTA. Because I just have the feeling, with no facts, that it might end up being a lot more expensive than any of us perhaps thought.
Sorry, Sam. Just through you, Chair, we're at the detailed design stage at the moment, and then going out for, so we have awarded the contract. So the amount that was budgeted has largely been set. If there are going to be any variations, we'll only know those as we're actually working through the project itself. But at the moment, we're actually right on budget, and we can provide the information back confirming the subsidy that we've received from NZTA, from Waka Kotahi. That actually hasn't been affected by the NLTP budget. It was a separate item that was allocated for this specific project, the Gladstone Road realignment.
I guess, like Member Jackson, I'm too concerned about this, and I think one thing that brings it home to me was that in terms of the emergency works, I think the original budget estimated was about 300k, so we've landed at, I think, just over 600. So I guess I'd be quite keen to have some assurance around the contingency for this project, so that we're really clear that there is that we've understood that and that's been built in, given the the challenging conditions we found out there.
Chairman, I did have a wager with Mr. Peel before he resigned, and I would have won, but he resigned rather than pay the wager.
I thought a wager would actually carry on after employment. That was poor negotiation.
I'm sorry, I do have two other things I've just seen on my screen. One relates to the reference to expenditure in relation to the Foxton East drainage scheme, 126,000. I was under the impression that we hadn't yet actually agreed to that project. Can we just, we had agreed to it because we provided for it in the LTP, but there's been a change of scope and quite a sizable difference in the original budget.
Yeah, so I'll find out if that's okay. We're just assuming at the moment that it's actually a carryover, like it's a total cost carryover from previous year, but I'll just clarify that and I'll come back to you.
And I said there was one more. Yeah. And then, sorry, just in relation to, there's just a couple of references to essentially lower spending due to Talaika, or the timing of Talaika, and I just wondered if we could talk about that. I think it's under both wastewater and then again under stormwater. Is that related to the O2NL?
No, it's just in relation to a tender process we've just been through. So we've just awarded the next stage. Work starts next week, and we've agreed a milestone reshuffle with the Crown on the basis of some of the other work that's going on with the land development in the middle of Taurika.
One last quick item, just to say that Councillor Jennings did ask for a more detailed listing of capital by project, or sort of by project or group of projects to support the capital information. So I will send that out after this meeting, just to let you know that it won't include forecasts, but when we look to go forward to the next meeting, it will get to that stage where it includes forecasts.
Thank you for that. I've got a question that's sort of similar to the Capex one. I noticed that our forecast or projection to June 22 currently is the same as the LTP on page 43, and I've been reliably informed that that process for updating the operational forecast will also be looked at, probably at quite a little, not quite the same degree initially. Can you just give some clarification on that?
Sure. So yes, that managers they've been focusing on the annual plan budgets actually at this stage for next year. But once those finished last week, so then the work will go forward in terms of starting to have a look at the forecasts and making sure those are updated on a monthly basis so that you can get a more accurate picture both in terms of OPEX and CAPEX.
Two questions for page 41. First one is the third bullet point, stormwater. What is the 126k for Foxton East Drainage Scheme in reference to?
So that was a question that was just asked by Councillor Jennings. I think that's what you were referring to. Yeah, so the answer to that will come back to you, and I'm pretty sure it's actually carried forward from the previous year, but I'll clarify that.
The following part then, sorry. North East Stormwater Pipeline Project.
Yeah, I'll get back to you on that one. That is possibly the way in which we've just deconstructed the project budget itself, and that'll be a cost that's attributed to stormwater as it relates to the green scheme, which included both the road widening, footpaths, sewer, stormwater and water, and that's most likely the pipeline component of that budget. But again, much like the previous answer, I'll confirm that back to you in writing.
Sorry, appears I have three. Apologies. In the last bullet point, and of course up until only hours ago, this wouldn't even have been a question, but the property activity whereby of the 1.2 we spend 972 on an alternative water source. How are those now? Because bearing in mind we've only had, I guess, discussion and meetings about feedback to a proposal, and now I'm asking how are we going to deal with these things, and when will we be meeting about that?
So that's actually a very, very good question, and I don't think many of us were aware that maybe what landed today is the announcement that was made by the Minister. But what we now have to do is understand the implications of that decision, and we need to come back to Council with a discussion that allows us to understand the implications of actually what's transpired today. We have a requirement, I think, very quickly to understand what the transition requirements might be if the legislation actually does play out, and we'll be looking at that next year. Some of the projects that, and I think it's a good example of a project that you've identified now, Councillor Tukapua, where to from here, given that that decision is actually being made, and it's something that the Council will have to have a discussion about in the short term. But we're not in a position, I suppose, to understand what the implications of that may be on that specific project just at this stage.
Sorry, supplementary, please. I guess, maybe the fact that it mentions strategic land purchase, it is under the property activity, not the water activity. So if we have this now, and of course we want our community to have it, but we should, charge government more, maybe. Shouldn't say that out loud, but yeah.
Would you just permit me a supplementary to Councillor Tukapua's question, which piqued my interest? The one thing that it might be useful to remind the committee is that as part of the Three Waters response that we sent on behalf of council, there were some questions at the end of that, which included some questions around how land would be or property would be treated, especially where it wasn't being held by council purely for a Three Waters purpose. And so I wonder if there is an exercise that this council needs to go through at some point to essentially identify land holdings and then whether it's the predominant purpose of Three Waters or otherwise, so that we're clear about which pieces of land that we're going to fight for and want to retain if it's got multi-use, I guess.
Yes, we need to do that. I won't be specific in terms of this. I think what you're alluding to, Councillor Jennings, but I think Councillor Tukapua has actually highlighted that this is a strategic consideration, and it's actually specifically under the property activity at the moment, but there are other tentacles to the discussion that we need to have over the next little period, because it is not just about water. There are other components that will potentially be attached to this as well, but it's something that we will have to bring back to council in the not too distant future. Are there any other comments on the financials? I think I'm going to get shot for the pun, but there's probably a whole large river that needs to go under the bridge before we get some clarity on what the Three Waters actually means in terms of the transition. I think if we've had a busy last 3 years, I think the next 2 years is going to be actually frantic in terms of understanding and doing that transfer in terms of the consequences for councils across the whole country. It's, at the moment, my understanding of planning is done at the high level. None of the detail has actually been really analysed, and it's that sort of example that you have actually raised, I think will be probably raised, my guess, probably 100 times at least in every council. And that will need to be, is it in, is it out, how does it transfer? But more importantly, if we're proposing doing some initial investigation into a project, say commencing in 4 years' time, do we actually carry on with that investigation? And what's the consequence for our community if we don't? So to me, there's a whole, we won't go there, but that to me, if we're talking risk, I think this has actually gone up the risk register dramatically as a result of the discussion today, or announcement today by central government. We'll see what happens. Any other comments? Right. Can I have a mover for the recommendation on page 35, please? I'll move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Christine. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Our next item is our Treasury Report. Just before you move on to that, Chair, if I could just go back to the previous item before this report when we were discussing the capping cost. The capping cost is exactly the same as we identified. The final capping cost was the same as we identified at the Project Steering Group, which is $861,000.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll take this report as read and happy to answer any questions.
Our interest rates going up. Okay, are there any serious questions? All right, no questions. Can I have a mover for the recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Ross. Seconded, Mayor Burney. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. It's carried. Last item is our work plan on page 91. I thought we'd be a tag team. You can introduce them and I'll support you. How's that?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, we have, in terms of the work program, I guess you'll see that in February, because of the council staff being away for a significant portion of January, The quarterly report, finance report particularly, for the end of December won't come until February. In regards to the point around January, we had some discussions at the pre-briefing today, Chair, and because there is some significant work happening with the national space with risk, and the desire of this committee to improve the risk reporting happens, we thought that it may be a good idea to replace the January meeting with what's on the current program, but to move that and instead have a risk workshop as part of it on the same day as what would have been the original.
Councillors who don't like the option of here and the other week before Christmas, which I don't think is really appropriate. So I might be here, I might. Well, actually, that's actually probably going to be a very good workshop here, isn't it, Councillor Ross? So yeah, I mean, I think I've actually been. This has been one of my frustrations, and I fully understand that the workload has been significant over the last period of time, both compared to anything else. But I think we have probably need to do significantly more work in understanding the risks, because that actually is one of the purposes of this committee. I think we actually need to really wind the lock up on our risk, not only our framework, but our reporting, our understanding, etc. going forward, because I see over the next period of time the risk levels for local authorities will increase dramatically across many sectors. And we think through all as a team, we can see the reforms on local government and also the R&D reforms. And I think we're looking for a top 5, at least 3 out of 5 already. So Member Jackson.
Chairman, because I think they go together and might work well, I wonder if we could get the insurance to work alongside.
We can absolutely try in terms of getting Aon to do it.
Mr. Chair, I guess there's, in terms of looking at this overarching work program, there's probably still some aspects which I was envisaging, or I would like to see as part of a sort of regular reporting framework. And it may be that the best framework to consider those is through the risk framework. I've got those on the table, and so one is around monitoring of council-held consents and how we're going in terms of compliance. That's something I haven't seen in terms of regular reporting. The second relates to, I guess, what I call staff engagement and culture, and that's something that Council Mark in particular made some comments to us recently about, and I asked some specific questions about what are the types of things you would envisage should be being reported to us on a regular basis, and we got some feedback around that. And then the third matter that that's not sort of a routine feature and maybe does need to be a bit more ad hoc, which is around litigation reporting. And so how councillors and legal members are being kept abreast of what litigation council is involved in, either defending or that council has taken. For example, at the moment, council's got 3 sets of litigation that it's involved in, and I don't know very much about it.
In terms of staff culture, I mean, clearly it's a fine line in my opinion between what's governance and management, right? But to me and this is where I see it reporting to other committees. There is one council committee that is a Audit Risk Committee that is also responsible, believe it or not, for evaluating the performance of the chief executive. So to me, that culture question and update, in my opinion, is part of the performance of the chief executive. So to me, it's actually a valid question if you're evaluating the performance of the chief executive. Say, what is KPI for one of the really what's the performance measure in terms of evaluating staff selection. That's a really hard one, but it's not an unrealistic measurement to gauge the performance of the chief executive. But I think the discussion for that one is very much in the domain of monitoring the performance of the chief executive, because he is the only, or he or she is the only employee. So to me, that's the responsibility of a council, is actually one of monitoring. So you say, here is what we expect, or this is our standard. How are we doing against that standard? That to me is the proper engagement process. Then if you've got concerns about that, the appropriate time is through the performance monitoring of the CEO.
Appreciate that that's one view. I think Adam Fairley from Council might take a different view, because in terms of the exchange of questions I had with him around some of the conclusions he'd made during Council Mark, and then I asked for some specific examples of things he thought that we should be routinely getting some reporting around. And that was around things like turnover, total number of PGs, and then he talked about performance reviews and the ratings in terms of where they were sitting. I guess, I mean, what's the way forward in terms of discussing this? Because obviously you've expressed a view around the appropriate mechanism, but in terms of also responding to our areas of improvement that are identified by Council Mark, I think this is something that we need to sort of tackle head on.
In terms of Council Mark, unfortunately I wasn't at the briefing, because I do actually disagree, and that's consistently not just for this council but for all the councils. So to me, is if there are specific things that the council would recommend we address it, the Council Mark made a number of recommendations. It's almost like the external audit or our internal audit. We've got some things that we should be moving towards that have been agreed by council. Then I think that is the appropriate way to then actually monitor it. So we say with the Council Mark, the council might actually agree or disagree with what's been said in Council Mark, and I'm not going to say what's right or what's wrong on that. But I would say then council then should be saying is, okay, this is what we want to improve. Then there should be regular reporting, every 3 months, probably back to council because it's a council function. How are we achieving on improving what we think needs to be done, just like we're doing on our audit reporting. We've got in our work program, we've got management letter updates from audit, just to say how we're progressing on the things that we agreed that need to be happening. So that to me is the appropriate way of resolving it, is it needs to be a council decision. The other issue you asked about litigation, and I mean, yes, that is a risk. The only challenge with litigation, often it needs to be in public excluded, and we're going to have a workshop after this, but my view is that if there is any significant updates, that needs to be done in public excluded. Now that does cause friction with the media, because you're getting an update, no information, no resolution, but then it's done in public excluded. So then the public perception is you're doing a whole lot of secret briefings for which the public aren't informed. So let's talk about how we manage that after the meeting, because I think the issue is it's actually quite a challenging process, that if you actually then start talking about process for setting litigation in open, then that's a very slippery slope, in my opinion. I'm not saying it shouldn't be reported, but there's some challenges about reporting. Are there any other comments, Councillor Pitiera?
Yeah, just a comment about that. So everyone would be aware there's a formal local government group called YEM, or Young Elected Members, where we network, and the question was put to the group, how do you treat litigation in your councils? We had responses from Whakatane, Southland, Whanau District, Rotorua City and Napier all say that it is reported, some quarterly, but yes, it is mostly just information, but it's an opportunity for elected members to be assured that those risks are mitigated. So I just thought I'd put out there that it's not heard of.
I think you need to clarify, it wasn't so that we shouldn't report it, it's about how it's reported, I think is the issue. I don't think we're disagreeing at this stage, we might later on. Are there any other comments? Therefore, can I have a recommendation that we actually receive probably the amended work program would be appropriate? So that's moved almost got myself. Member Brian, seconded Councillor David. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Our last item is our actions. It's taken as read. So the ones that have been complete will drop off on our next report. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Ross, seconded. Thank you, Councillor David. Any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Thank you for your attendance today and declare the meeting closed. Thank you.